When 52-year-old mechanic Daniel Rogers accepted a seemingly impossible bet in Oakwood, Kentucky, nobody knew he possessed a photographic memory so extraordinary he could reconstruct any engine from pure recall alone. A gift born from the tragic car accident that claimed his wife, Grace, 5 years earlier. What started as cocky young Tony Miller challenging the town's mechanics to rebuild a 1967 Shelby GT500 engine without manuals or references quickly became the most talked-about event in Oakwood's history, drawing crowds, journalists, and eventually the attention of mysterious collector Gregory Allen. By sunset the next day, Daniel had gone from a struggling single father worried about his daughter Amy's college tuition to a man offered a $1 million position that would change everything. This is the extraordinary story of how hidden talent, tragedy, and an impossible challenge converged to create a life-changing moment that proves sometimes the most remarkable abilities are forged in our darkest hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Benedetto's auto shop as Daniel Rogers pulled his weathered Ford pickup into the familiar parking space beside the building. At 52, his hands showed the permanent stains of motor oil and calluses that spoke of 3 decades working with engines. The shop itself reflected the economic struggles of Oakwood, Kentucky, a town that had seen better days when the manufacturing plant still operated at full capacity. Daniel stepped out of his truck, wincing slightly as his back protested the movement. The long hours bent over engine bays were taking their toll. But he couldn't afford to slow down. Not with Amy's second year of pre-med starting in just 2 months and the tuition bill sitting unopened on his kitchen table. "Morning, Danny boy." Sal Benedetto emerged from the shop's office, coffee mug in hand, and a warm smile creasing his weathered Italian features. At 68, Sal had owned the garage for 43 years, hiring Daniel fresh out of high school when other shops wouldn't take a chance on an untested kid. "Morning, Sal. That transmission from the Henderson job ready to go back in?" "Should be. Danny Martinez got it buttoned up yesterday afternoon. Kid's got good hands." Sal sipped his coffee, studying Daniel's, faced with the concern of someone who'd watched him struggle through the worst period of his life. "You look tired. Amy keeping you up with college prep?" Daniel shrugged, grabbing his toolbox from the truck bed. The weight felt heavier these days, though he'd never admit it. "Just the usual worries. Medical school applications, MCAT prep, finances. That girl's got brains like her mother. She'll make it." The mention of Grace brought the familiar tightness to Daniel's chest. 5 years since the accident, and certain conversations still felt like reopening wounds. "Yeah, she will. Just need to make sure I can cover my end of the bargain." The shop's main bay housed a 2018 Honda Civic with transmission problems, while a bench held Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick that refused to stay aligned. Steady work, but nothing that would significantly dent Amy's tuition costs. Daniel had run the numbers countless times, lying awake at night, calculating overtime hours against mounting bills. Danny Martinez looked up from the Honda as Daniel approached. At 22, Danny represented the new generation of mechanics, trained on computer diagnostics and comfortable with the electronic systems that sometimes baffled older technicians. But he respected Daniel's intuitive understanding of mechanical systems, often seeking his opinion on difficult problems. "Mr. Rogers, this transmission's giving me grief. Everything checks out on the diagnostic, but something's not right with the shift pattern." Daniel set down his toolbox and listened as Danny started the engine. Within seconds, he detected the subtle irregularity in the transmission's operation, a slight hesitation that the diagnostic computer couldn't identify. Torque converter not locking up properly. Probably a solenoid issue, but check the valve body first. Sometimes debris gets caught in the passages. Danny's face lit up with understanding. "I never would have caught that from the sound alone." "Experience. You'll get there." The morning progressed with routine maintenance and minor repairs. Daniel found comfort in the predictable nature of mechanical problems. Unlike life's complexities, engines followed logical patterns. If you understood the fundamentals, you could diagnose and fix almost anything. Around 10:30, the familiar rumble of a modified exhaust announced Tony Miller's arrival. Tony owned a small garage across town that catered to younger customers wanting performance modifications and custom work. At 28, he'd built a reputation for flashy builds and an even flashier personality. Tony's bright red Camaro SS pulled into the lot with unnecessary drama, the supercharged engine announcing his presence to the entire neighborhood. He stepped out wearing pristine work clothes that suggested more time spent talking about cars than actually working on them. "Sal, Danny boy, Tony," he nodded to each man with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never struggled to pay bills. "Heard you guys are working on some boring grocery getter transmissions? Maybe it's time to upgrade your clientele?" Sal's expression tightened. He'd tolerated Tony's attitude for years, recognizing him as competition, but finding his methods distasteful. "We take care of this community, Tony. Real people with real needs." "Real people need real performance," Tony countered. "Speaking of which, I just picked up something you old-timers might find interesting." Tony walked to his car's trunk and began removing items with theatrical flair. First came a comprehensive technical manual, thick with detailed diagrams and specifications, then several smaller manuals and reference guides. Finally, he revealed what appeared to be engine components wrapped in protective cloth. Complete 1967 Shelby GT 500 428 Cobra jet engine. Every piece from the block to the last gasket, original factory specifications. Tony's grin widened as he saw Daniel's involuntary interest. "Picked it up from an estate sale. Previous owner had it fully disassembled for restoration before he passed." Daniel approached the components despite himself. The 428 Cobra jet represented the pinnacle of American muscle car engineering, a power plant capable of producing over 400 horsepower in an era when manufacturers underrated their engines for insurance purposes. Even disassembled, the parts commanded respect. "Beautiful pieces," Daniel admitted, examining the forged steel crankshaft. "Don't see many of these anymore." "That's exactly what I thought," Tony said, his voice taking on the tone of someone about to deliver a punchline. "Which gave me an interesting idea. I'm thinking of hosting a little competition. See who among Oakwood's so-called master mechanics can actually put this baby back together." Sal snorted, the manual sitting right there. "Not much of a challenge." Tony's grin became predatory. "That's where it gets interesting, old man. No manuals, no reference materials, no computer diagnostics, nothing but pure mechanical knowledge and experience. Just you, the parts, and whatever you've got stored up here." He tapped his temple with exaggerated emphasis. The shop fell silent except for the distant hum of the air compressor. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of interest and apprehension. The challenge appealed to the part of him that had always been drawn to complex mechanical puzzles, but accepting would mean public attention he'd spent years avoiding. "You're talking about a complete engine rebuild from memory alone?" Danny asked, his voice filled with awe and skepticism. "Complete rebuild. Every component in its proper place, every specification correct, every torque setting precise. First person to successfully complete the assembly wins bragging rights and a nice little pot we'll put together from entry fees." Sal shook his head dismissively. "That's not a competition. It's a stunt. Modern engines are complex enough with all the documentation available. Trying to rebuild a classic performance engine from memory alone? You're asking for trouble." "Maybe for some people." Tony's eyes found Daniel's. "But I hear there are mechanics in this town who claim to know engines inside and out. Seems like a perfect opportunity to prove it." The challenge hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Daniel felt the weight of expectation from the younger mechanics who'd gathered to watch the exchange. In a small town, reputations were built on moments like these, and Tony had deliberately crafted a situation designed to embarrass anyone foolish enough to accept. "What kind of entry fee are we talking about?" Daniel heard himself ask, immediately regretting the words. Tony's smile became triumphant. $500 per person. Winner takes the pot plus whatever side bets people want to make. Should be enough to make things interesting." $500. Nearly a quarter of what Daniel had managed to save toward Amy's tuition. The responsible part of his mind screamed warnings about gambling with money he couldn't afford to lose. But another part, the part that remembered what it felt like to be recognized for exceptional ability, whispered different counsel. "When and where?" Daniel asked quietly. Sal grabbed his arm. "Danny, don't be stupid. This is exactly what he wants. You got nothing to prove to this kid. Next Saturday, 1 week from today, we'll set up at the community college shop classroom. Neutral ground, plenty of space, and Dr. Bennett can supervise to make sure everything's legitimate." Dr. Michael Bennett taught automotive engineering at Oakwood Community College and maintained a reputation for fairness and technical expertise. His involvement would lend credibility to what might otherwise seem like a publicity stunt. Dr. Bennett agreed enthusiastically. He's interested in the educational value, said it would be a good demonstration of practical versus theoretical knowledge for his students. Daniel weighed the implications. The money represented a significant risk, but success could provide both financial help and professional validation. More importantly, the challenge appealed to abilities he'd kept hidden for years. Talents developed through necessity and refined through private study. "I'll need to think about it," Daniel said finally. "Fair enough. But don't take too long. Word's already getting around town, and I expect several participants." Tony began rewrapping the engine components. Should be quite a show. Might even attract some outside attention. You know how people love to see small-town mechanics try to play in the big leagues. The implied insult wasn't lost on anyone present. Tony had a gift for making challenges sound like foregone conclusions, always positioning himself as the professional among amateurs. As Tony loaded his car and prepared to leave, he turned back with an afterthought. "Oh, and Danny bring cash. No checks, no credit cards. This is a man's bet, settled like men settle things." The Camaro's departure left an uncomfortable silence in its wake. Daniel stood staring at the empty parking space, his mind already visualizing the complexity of a complete engine assembly. Every component had to fit precisely. Every clearance had to be exact. Every torque specification had to be perfect. "You're not seriously considering this," Sal said, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. $500 would help with Amy's expenses. $500 lost would hurt a lot more than it would help. Danny Martinez looked between the two men, sensing the deep currents of the conversation. "Mr. Rogers, do you really think it's possible, rebuilding an entire engine from memory?" Daniel met the young man's curious gaze. How could he explain that he'd been carrying detailed images of hundreds of engines in his mind for years? That he could visualize every component of the 428 Cobra jet down to individual bolt patterns and gasket configurations, that his memory had become both blessing and curse. Preserving technical details with photographic precision while also holding on to painful memories he'd rather forget. "Depends on how well you know the engine," Daniel said simply. The rest of the day passed with routine work, but Daniel's thoughts kept returning to Tony's challenge. By closing time, word had spread through Oakwood's small automotive community. 3 other mechanics had reportedly accepted the challenge, and speculation was building about potential outcomes. As Daniel prepared to leave, Sal approached with the expression of someone who'd been wrestling with difficult thoughts. "Danny, I've known you for over 30 years, watched you work through problems that stumped mechanics twice your age. But this feels different. This feels personal." "Maybe it is," Daniel conceded. "That boy is trying to humiliate you, make a show of your struggle for his own entertainment." Daniel considered this assessment. Tony Miller represented everything he disliked about the modern automotive culture: flash over substance, marketing over craftsmanship, ego over expertise. But the challenge itself transcended Tony's motives. "What if I can do it, Sal? What if I can actually rebuild that engine from memory alone?" Sal studied his friend's face, seeing something there he hadn't observed in years. A spark of confidence, a glimmer of the exceptional mechanic he'd always known Daniel to be. "Then you'd better start preparing, because if you're going to do this, you're going to do it right." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills that seemed to multiply regardless of how many hours he worked. The tired, small apartment above Henderson's Bakery had been home for 3 years, ever since he'd sold the house to pay Grace's medical expenses. The aroma of tomorrow's bread drifted up through the floorboards, a constant reminder of simpler times when such smells meant comfort rather than the proximity forced by financial necessity. Amy burst through the front door with her characteristic energy, arms loaded with textbooks and the laptop she'd bought secondhand for her studies. At 19, she possessed Grace's determined spirit and quick mind, combined with Daniel's methodical approach to problems. Her pre-med coursework demanded 16-hour study days. Yet, she still found time to work weekends at the campus bookstore. "Dad, you look like someone stole your favorite wrench." She dropped her books on the counter and immediately began assessing his mood with the perceptiveness that made her an excellent student. "What happened today?" Daniel pushed the bills aside, not wanting to burden her with financial worries she couldn't solve. "Tony Miller stopped by the shop with some kind of challenge. Wants to see who can rebuild an engine from memory alone." Amy's eyes lit up with interest as she poured herself a glass of water. "Like a competition? That sounds right up your alley. You know more about engines than anyone in 3 counties. It's not that simple. There's an entry fee and the engine is a 1967 Shelby GT500. Complex piece of machinery. Most people would need manuals to reference the specifications. But not you, Amy said, settling into the chair across from him, her expression growing serious. Dad, I've watched you diagnose problems that stumped other mechanics just by listening to engines run. You remember details about cars you worked on years ago? This isn't about most people. Daniel felt the familiar weight of unspoken truth. Amy knew he possessed exceptional memory capabilities, but she'd never understood the full extent of his abilities. How could he explain that he could visualize every component of that Shelby engine with perfect clarity? That he'd spent countless hours studying technical manuals and specifications, not just for practical purposes, but as a way to occupy his mind during the darkest period of his life? The entry fee is $500, he said quietly. Amy's expression sobered instantly. She understood their financial situation better than he wished, having grown up watching him work extra shifts and skip meals to ensure her needs were met. That's a lot of money for us. Too much to risk on what might be a fool's errand. Amy studied her father's face, seeing something beyond his practical concerns. But you want to do it. I can tell. Daniel stood and walked to the window overlooking Main Street. Oakwood's downtown showed signs of economic decline that mirrored their personal struggles. Empty storefronts punctuated the row of businesses that had survived the latest recession, while the new strip mall on the highway drew customers away from family-owned establishments. Your mother always said I was too cautious, that I let opportunities pass because I was afraid of failing. Mom also said you were the most capable person she'd ever known, that you could fix anything if, you set your mind to it. The mention of Grace's confidence in his abilities brought both comfort and pain. She'd believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself, pushing him to pursue opportunities he might otherwise have avoided. Tell me about the accident again, Amy said softly. Daniel tensed. They'd discussed Grace's death countless times over the years, but Amy's recent psychology courses had made her more perceptive about the emotional undercurrents he tried to hide. Amy, we've been through this. Not the facts. I know the facts. Tell me about what happened to you afterward, about how you changed. Daniel returned to his chair, recognizing his daughter's determination to understand. She'd inherited Grace's ability to probe gently but persistently until she reached the truth. The first few months were difficult. I couldn't focus at work and couldn't sleep. Couldn't think about anything except the details of that night. The accident had occurred on a rainy November evening 5 years earlier. Grace had been driving home from her nursing shift at the county hospital when a drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Oak and Main. The impact had been devastating, killing Grace instantly and critically injuring the other driver's family. I started reading everything I could find about the accident. Police reports, medical examiner's findings, insurance investigations. I needed to understand exactly what had happened, every detail, every factor that contributed to the outcome. Amy waited patiently, understanding that these revelations required careful timing. Then I started reading medical journals, trying to understand her injuries, the trauma procedures the hospital had attempted. I wanted to know if there was anything that could have been done differently. What Daniel didn't mention was how his grief had evolved into an obsessive need to understand every technical detail he encountered. Medical procedures, trauma protocols, automotive safety systems, accident reconstruction techniques. His mind had become a repository for information, storing details with photographic precision as a way to maintain control in a world that had suddenly become unpredictable. The reading helped at first, but then I realized I was remembering everything perfectly. Not just the general concepts, but exact quotes, specific diagrams, precise measurements. I could recall entire pages of technical specifications without effort. Amy leaned forward, fascinated. Like a photographic memory. More than that. It was as if my brain had rewired itself to capture and preserve information with perfect fidelity. I started testing it, memorizing repair manuals and engine specifications. Within months, I could visualize complete technical systems in my mind. Dad, that's incredible. Why haven't you ever talked about this? Daniel struggled to articulate the complex emotions surrounding his enhanced memory. Because it felt wrong to benefit from something that came from losing your mother. Like I was profiting from tragedy. Amy reached across the table and took his hand. Mom would want you to use every advantage you have. She'd want you to help people with your abilities, not hide them. I do help people every day at the shop, but not like you could. Not like this competition would let you. Daniel considered her words. The Shelby Engine Challenge represented more than a chance to win money. It was an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities he'd kept hidden, to show what intuitive understanding combined with perfect recall could accomplish. Even if I could rebuild the engine perfectly, Tony Miller isn't going to make it easy. He's planning this as entertainment, probably expecting most participants to fail publicly. Then don't give him that satisfaction. Show everyone what real expertise looks like. Before Daniel could respond, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Amy answered to find Lauren Parker, a woman in her late 30s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to asking difficult questions. Mr. Rogers, I'm Lauren Parker from Automotive Weekly magazine. I understand you're considering participating in an unusual competition this weekend. Daniel stood slowly, wondering how word had traveled so quickly beyond Oakwood's borders. News travels fast. Small-town mechanical competitions aren't usually my beat, but a colleague mentioned something about rebuilding a Shelby engine from memory alone. That's the kind of story that gets attention in automotive circles. Lauren's presence suggested the challenge had attracted interest beyond local participants. Daniel invited her inside, noting her professional demeanor and the recording device she produced from her briefcase. I'm researching a piece about traditional craftsmanship versus modern technology. The idea of mechanics who can work without computer diagnostics or technical manuals fits perfectly with my thesis, which is that we're losing fundamental skills in favor of technological dependence, that mechanics like you represent a dying breed of craftsmen who understand machines intuitively. Amy excused herself to study, but Daniel caught her encouraging smile as she gathered her books. Lauren settled at the kitchen table, establishing the easy rapport of an experienced interviewer. Tell me about your background, Mr. Rogers. How long have you been working on engines? For the next hour, Daniel found himself sharing stories he rarely discussed. His early apprenticeship with Sal Benedetto, the satisfaction of solving complex mechanical problems, the evolution of automotive technology over 3 decades. Lauren asked perceptive questions that demonstrated genuine understanding of mechanical systems. What made you consider this particular challenge? Rebuilding a performance engine from memory seems extraordinarily difficult. Daniel chose his words carefully. unwilling to reveal the full extent of his abilities to someone who might sensationalize them. Experience teaches you to see patterns. Once you understand the fundamental principles, specific engines become variations on familiar themes. But the 428 Cobra jet isn't just any engine. It's one of the most complex performance power plants of its era. Complex, but logical. Ford's engineers designed it for maximum power within specific constraints. Understanding their priorities helps predict their solutions. Lauren made notes as they talked, occasionally asking for clarification on technical points. Her questions revealed extensive research into both the specific engine and the broader competition. I've spoken with Dr. Bennett about supervising the event. He mentioned that several experienced mechanics have entered, but he seems particularly interested in your participation. Dr. Bennett knows my work. He said you'd solved several problems for his students over the years. Apparently, you have a reputation for seeing solutions others miss. Daniel felt a flush of pride at the recognition, followed immediately by apprehension about increased attention. I just approach problems methodically enough to rebuild a complete engine without references. The direct question hung in the air between them. Daniel realized that his answer would likely determine whether Lauren's article portrayed him as a confident professional or a reckless amateur. I believe so. Yes, Lauren smiled, apparently satisfied with his response. That kind of confidence is exactly what makes this story interesting. Mind if I follow up with some technical questions about the engine itself? For the next 30 minutes, Lauren tested Daniel's knowledge of the 428 Cobra jet specifications. Compression ratios, camshaft timing, carburetor configurations, ignition systems. Daniel answered each question precisely, drawing on the detailed information stored in his enhanced memory. Impressive, Lauren said finally. Most mechanics would need reference materials for that level of detail. Experience, Daniel repeated, though he could see the journalist's skeptical interest. After Lauren left with promises to attend Saturday's competition, Daniel found Amy waiting in the living room with her textbooks. She seemed nice. Also seemed like she thinks you're going to do something remarkable this weekend if I decide to participate. Amy set aside her biology notes and fixed him with the direct gaze she'd inherited from her mother. Dad, you're going to do this. We both know it. The question is whether you're going to do it confidently or spend the next week worrying about failure. Daniel sank into his worn recliner, feeling the weight of decisions settling around him. The money represents a real risk, Amy. If I lose that $500, it affects your tuition, our rent, everything. And if I win, it helps. But winning requires beating at least 3 other experienced mechanics in front of a crowd that includes journalists and college professors. Amy closed her textbook and moved to sit on the arm of his chair. Remember when I was 12 and wanted to try out for the debate team? You told me that being afraid of failure was just another way of choosing to fail. Daniel smiled at the memory. Amy had not only made the debate team, but had led them to the state championships 2 years running. That was different. You were competing with kids your own age. This is you competing with your peers, mechanics who've worked on engines for decades just like you have. The only difference is what you carry up here. She tapped his temple gently. And what you carry is something special. Your mother used to say that because it's true, Dad. I've watched you fix things that seemed impossible. I've seen other mechanics bring you problems they couldn't solve. This competition isn't about proving anything to Tony Miller or impressing journalists. It's about using the abilities Mom's death somehow gave you to create opportunities for our future. Daniel felt the emotional barriers he'd maintained around his enhanced memory beginning to shift. For 5 years, he'd viewed his perfect recall as a burden born from tragedy. But Amy was suggesting a different perspective, that Grace's death had revealed capabilities that could honor her memory through their practical application. If I do this, I do it completely. No half measures, no excuses if things don't work out. Amy's smile lit up her entire face. That's the dad I remember. The one who never backed down from a challenge when it mattered. Then, I guess I better start preparing. Saturday is only 5 days away. What kind of preparation do you need for a perfect memory? Daniel considered the question seriously. Practice visualizing the assembly sequence. Review the specific torque specifications and clearances. Make sure I can recall every detail under pressure. Sounds like you're going to win this thing. Sounds like I'm going to try. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in Kentucky, bringing with it a nervous energy that seemed to permeate every corner of Oakwood. Daniel had spent the week in careful preparation, using quiet moments at the shop to mentally rehearse the Shelby engine assembly sequence. Each night, he'd sit in his recliner with his eyes closed, visualizing components and their relationships in perfect detail, testing his recall against the comprehensive images stored in his enhanced memory. The preparation ritual had become almost meditative. Daniel would begin with the engine block, mentally examining every surface, every bolt hole, every machined passage. Then he'd add components systematically: crankshaft, pistons, connecting rods, cylinder heads, valve train, intake manifold, exhaust manifolds, carburetor, ignition system, and dozens of smaller parts that collectively transformed metal into a mechanical symphony. Amy sat at the kitchen table grading practice MCAT questions, occasionally glancing up to watch her father's preparation routine. She'd learned not to interrupt these sessions, recognizing them as both technical review and emotional centering. "How many people do you think will show up tomorrow?" she asked during one of his breaks. Daniel opened his eyes and stretched, working out the tension that built in his neck during intense concentration. "Hard to say. Word's gotten around pretty thoroughly. Sal mentioned that people have been calling the shop all week, asking for details." "Are you nervous?" The question deserved honest consideration. Daniel felt a complex mixture of anticipation, confidence, and underlying anxiety about performing under public scrutiny. About the engine? No. About everything else? Definitely. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Daniel opened it to find Dr. Michael Bennett standing in the hallway, looking somewhat awkward in casual clothes rather than his usual professorial attire. "Mr. Rogers, I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to discuss tomorrow's event and make sure you understood the ground rules." Daniel invited him inside, noting the professor's careful assessment of their modest living space. At 45, Dr. Bennett carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to academic authority, but his manner suggested genuine respect for practical expertise. "Dr. Bennett, this is my daughter Amy." "Amy," Dr. Bennett said, "I teach automotive engineering at the community college." Amy stood to shake hands, immediately launching into questions about the engineering program. "I'm pre-med now, but I've always been fascinated by mechanical systems. Dad's taught me quite a bit over the years. Your father has an excellent reputation among my students. Several have mentioned learning more from brief conversations with him than from entire textbook chapters. Daniel felt a flush of pride mixed with embarrassment. Just different ways of looking at problems. Dr. Bennett settled at the kitchen table, producing a folder of official-looking documents. I wanted to review the competition rules to ensure fairness for all participants. We've had some additional interest since word spread beyond Oakwood. How much additional interest? Amy asked. 3 mechanics from neighboring counties have entered, plus 1 from Louisville, who apparently specializes in classic muscle cars. The pot has grown to over $4,000. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The increased stakes changed everything, transforming a local challenge into a regional competition with serious financial implications. That's a significant amount of money, he said carefully. It is, which is why I want to emphasize the strict parameters we've established. No reference materials of any kind will be permitted in the work area. No cell phones, no computers, no consultation with spectators. Each participant will work independently with only basic hand tools provided. Dr. Bennett spread diagrams across the table, showing the college shop's layout. We've set up 4 separate workstations, each with identical tool sets and adequate lighting. The engine components will be presented in randomized order to prevent anyone from gaining an advantage through preparation sequence. Amy leaned forward to examine the diagrams. How long do participants have to complete the assembly? No time limit, but we expect most attempts to require between 6 and 10 hours. We'll start at 8 a.m. and continue until everyone either completes or concedes. The mention of potential failure brought Daniel's anxieties into sharp focus. Public concession would be professionally humiliating, particularly with journalists present to document the event. What happens if someone makes an error during assembly? Daniel asked. That depends on the severity. Minor mistakes that don't affect engine function might be overlooked, but incorrect component placement or improper torque specifications would likely prevent successful completion. Dr. Bennett's tone suggested he expected most participants to struggle with the challenge's complexity. I should mention that I've researched the 428 Cobra jet extensively in preparation for supervising. It's an extraordinarily sophisticated engine with numerous variations depending on production year and application. Getting everything exactly right requires extensive knowledge. Have you shared that research with the other participants? Amy asked pointedly. Of course not. My role is to verify correct assembly, not to provide assistance. Daniel appreciated Dr. Bennett's commitment to fairness, but wondered if the professor understood the true scope of what he was attempting. Rebuilding any engine from memory required comprehensive knowledge of hundreds of components and their relationships. The 428 Cobra jet added layers of complexity that would challenge even experienced mechanics with full documentation. Dr. Bennett, can I ask why you agreed to supervise this event? It seems outside your usual academic responsibilities. The professor considered the question thoughtfully. Honestly, because I'm curious about the intersection of theoretical knowledge and practical expertise. My students learn principles and procedures, but they rarely see those concepts applied by someone with decades of hands-on experience. You think academic training isn't sufficient? I think academic training is essential but incomplete. Real mastery requires something textbooks can't provide, intuitive understanding developed through years of problem solving. Amy smiled at this validation of her father's abilities. That's exactly what Dad always says. that engines have personalities and you have to learn to listen to them. Dr. Bennett nodded approvingly. Precisely. Which brings me to another point, Mr. Rogers. I understand you've developed some unconventional diagnostic techniques over the years. Students have mentioned your ability to identify problems through sound analysis and other sensory methods. Daniel tensed, uncertain how much he wanted to reveal about his enhanced capabilities. Experience teaches you to notice patterns. I'm sure it does. I'm hoping tomorrow's demonstration will help my students understand the value of that experiential learning. After Dr. Bennett left with final reminders about reporting time and procedures, Daniel found himself facing the reality of heightened expectations. The professor clearly viewed him as a representative of traditional craftsmanship, while participants and spectators would be looking for either vindication or failure of old-school methods. "You're overthinking this," Amy observed, watching his expression. "Dr. Bennett believes in you. The journalists believe in you. Even Tony Miller believes in you. Or he wouldn't have created this challenge specifically to test your abilities." "Tony created this challenge to embarrass me." "Maybe initially, but look how it's evolved. Regional participants, significant prize money, academic supervision, media coverage. This stopped being about Tony's ego days ago." Daniel walked to the window, watching evening settle over Oakwood's quiet streets. Tomorrow would bring attention he'd avoided for years, putting his hidden abilities on display for evaluation by peers and strangers alike. What if I fail? What if my memory isn't as reliable under pressure as I think it is? Amy joined him at the window, slipping her arm around his waist in a gesture that reminded him powerfully of Grace. "Then you fail attempting something extraordinary. There's no shame in that. There's $500 of shame we can't afford. Dad, win or lose, this competition changes how people see you. Dr. Bennett's students will remember the mechanic who was confident enough to try something impossible. Other professionals will know your name. That kind of recognition creates opportunities, or it creates a reputation for poor judgment." Amy turned to face him directly, her expression serious. "Do you remember what you told me before my first debate competition?" When I was terrified of looking stupid in front of the whole school, Daniel smiled slightly, recalling the conversation. That being afraid of looking stupid was the best way to guarantee you'd act stupid. Exactly. And what else? That confidence isn't about knowing you'll succeed. It's about believing your preparation gives you the best possible chance. So the question isn't whether you might fail. The question is whether you're prepared. Daniel considered his week of mental rehearsal, the countless hours he'd spent visualizing the engine assembly in perfect detail. His enhanced memory had cataloged every specification, every torque setting, every clearance measurement. He could recall the exact positioning of each component and the precise sequence required for proper assembly. "I'm prepared," he said finally. "Then trust your preparation." Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of October weather that made Kentucky beautiful. Daniel arrived at the community college campus 45 minutes early, wanting to familiarize himself with the work environment before the competition began. The automotive shop buzzed with activity as Dr. Bennett and several students prepared. The workstations, each a separate area, had been meticulously organized with identical tool sets, adequate lighting, and space for component layout. The Shelby engine part sat in the center of the shop on a large table covered by a canvas tarp that would remain in place until all participants were ready to begin. "Mr. Rogers, good morning." Dr. Bennett approached with a clipboard and official demeanor. "You're the first to arrive. How are you feeling?" "Ready," Daniel replied, though his stomach churned with nervous energy. "Excellent. Let me show you to your workstation." The assigned area felt both spacious and confining, with enough room to work comfortably, but clear boundaries that emphasized the solitary nature of the challenge. Daniel examined the provided tools, noting their quality and completeness. Everything necessary for engine assembly was present, from basic wrenches to precision measuring instruments. Amy arrived with coffee and moral support, followed closely by Sal Benedetto and several mechanics from the shop. Their presence provided comfort, but also added pressure to perform well in front of people who respected his abilities. "Danny boy, you look like a man about to do something memorable," Sal said with forced cheerfulness that didn't quite mask his concern. "That's the plan." Tony Miller arrived precisely at 7:30 with characteristic flair, parking his Camaro prominently in front of the building. He entered the shop with 3 companions Daniel didn't recognize, all carrying themselves with the confidence of experienced mechanics. "Danny Rogers," Tony called out with exaggerated friendliness. "Ready to show everyone what small-town expertise looks like?" "Ready to do my best." The other participants began arriving shortly after, each taking time to examine their workstations and assess the competition. Daniel recognized Jake Morrison and Jimmy Murphy from neighboring towns, both solid mechanics with good reputations. The fourth,